So with that, what I want to do is introduce you to Stephanie Brannick. Did I get it right? I got it right. Wow. And Stephanie is going to talk to us about organ donation. You will actually, she'll talk to you probably about the junk she has out there. But as we're planning, one of the things that can be one of the greatest gifts we can give is the chance for somebody else to extend their lives. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Everybody give a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I clapped beforehand. I like it. I'm Stephanie. I'm from Life Connection, Ohio. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator. And we are going to talk about organ and tissue donation today. A little bit about what we do at Life Connection, our purpose, and just our meeting about our organization, and a little bit about what community service and other departments that we do. I do have Don with me. He's in the back, and he is working our table out front. And Don is a great volunteer. He's been with me for a little while now, and he's a liver recipient of 11 years, right? 11 years. So maybe you'll have some time to talk with him. I know a few of you have, but he would love to kind of talk with you about organ donation, share a little bit about his journey, but he's a wonderful volunteer. So we'll go ahead and get started. So this is just our core value at Life Connection. I won't read all of it, but this is uncompromising advocacy. You know, we're all about educating on the public with anyone that we can talk to about organ and tissue donation. We are compassionate. We care for our families. We want to be with them from beginning to the very end, and that we want to have that compassion throughout the whole process. And we want to build meaningful and lifelong relationships, just like how we have Don with me today. You know, we have a volunteer family, and we consider them family with us because we want to make sure that they feel welcome and that we are using their gifts and their passion to be able to advocate about organ donation. And then we want to deliver and connect a purpose that is beyond tragedy. You know, we are dealing with something that is pretty, severe with someone passing, and we recover the organs for transplant. But we want to be able to bring light to that and to be able to showcase that someone can give the gift of life and help someone else live on, to be with their family, to watch their kids grow, to go to graduations, to go to weddings. That's what we advocate for as well. So uncompromising advocacy. So the waiting list, there's 110,000 people waiting. So we like to show this picture. Does anybody know the stadium? Okay. Yeah, Ohio State Stadium. So Ohio State fans in here? Most, maybe? I know sometimes they get a Michigan every now and then. Okay, well, that's okay. But we like to say that this stadium holds about 105,000, maybe a little bit more. So we kind of want to give you just a visual about how many people are waiting right now. So just think, this whole stadium is full. That's how many people are waiting for a transplant in the United States. So we just kind of like to give you a visual you can kind of see how many people are waiting right now.
If you had the Michigan Stadium up there, it would be 100.
Hey. So nearly, like I said, 110,000 people are waiting for a transplant. Every 10 minutes, someone new is added to the list. So throughout my presentation, you kind of just check, like every 10 minutes. Don't check your watches while I talk, though. But every 10 minutes, so I can keep you engaged. But every 10 minutes, someone new is added to the list. That's a lot. Every 10 minutes, someone new is added. 20 people die each day waiting for their life-saving transplant. 20 people. And every day, 77 organs are transplanted. Okay, so that's just some statistics there.
That's nationwide?
United States. So recipients. We like to showcase our recipients. Okay, I talked about Dawn today. These are some other recipients that we have here at Life Connection. So this is Rick Brown. He's a kidney and pancreas recipient. So he received both about 12 years ago. And that's his little granddaughter. He's able to go down the slide, take her to the park. And his donor family is actually here in Dayton. So they are one of my volunteers as well. His donor family are my volunteers, and he's in the Toledo area. Okay, so Life Connection of Ohio, we do serve Dayton as well as Toledo. So he travels down sometimes to the Dayton Dragons games, and they meet up where we have events there, which is really great. But he's able to do that because of the transplant. And this is Chris. He was in the Toledo office as well. Unfortunately, Chris has passed, but he did get an additional 13 years with his double lung transplant. And his one thing that he said, I want to walk my daughter down the aisle. What did he do? He got to walk her down the aisle. So that was his one thing that he wanted to do. Okay, kind of like that sign out there. What do I want to do before I die? His main thing was I want to walk her down the aisle. And he did get that because of the transplant, his double lung. And this is Allison Herr. Allison's a vibrant 19-year-old now, and she received a liver transplant when she was just a little baby, about 6 months old. She received a liver transplant and is doing phenomenal. There's a beautiful picture of her that we'll see at the end of her on a horse when it's a questions slide, but she's doing so well, and because of that liver transplant. Okay. When she graduated from high school, that was her picture. Some more families here. We do different events in the Dayton and Toledo area, so we'll talk more about that coming up. But again, we have families that are honoring their loved ones. Our son gave life, so we do different things for the donor families. This is her son, which we'll talk about in a little bit. He's on like the trucking company trucks, and we'll see if you guys have seen that around. I'll show you a picture. It's highway trucking, and we'll see if you've ever seen that. And this is Kevin Foltz. This is where it comes full circle. So Kevin lost his dad about 5 years ago. He was a police officer, and he was an organ donor. Didn't think ever that Life Connection would come back to him. He now works for us in the Toledo office. So he's an education major, so he goes in and speaks to those freshmen and sophomores who are about to get their license and their permit about organ donation and teaches the kids in the schools. So how about that just coming full circle? You know, he's had the donor family side and the importance of donation. He's met his dad's recipients. He's got to see that those people are now living because of his dad, and he's working at Life Connection Ohio. So full circle for Kevin. There's a lot of myths out there about organ donation. A lot of them. These are just some major ones. So the first one, if I'm an organ donor, doctors are not going to try everything to save me. That's absolutely false. Those doctors are going to try everything in their power to save someone. That's their main goal, not about organ donation. And TV shows and things like that, they kind of put a bad light on what we do. They're like, uh-oh, this guy's a donor. Come on, let's get him. That's not how it works. Not at all. Okay, those TV shows, they need to consult OPOs like us, organ procurement organizations, and we'll tell you how it really is, but not on a TV show. But those doctors are going to do everything in their power to try to save you. Donation comes in as the last resort. Brain death has occurred. There's no other option. So that's when organ donation can be considered. Okay? So they're going to do everything in their power to try to save you. Donation would disfigure my body so I couldn't have an open casket funeral. Yes, you can. You can definitely have an open casket viewing. If you're an organ, eye, and tissue donor, the eyes are closed. Again, we don't take the whole eye. We just take the cornea, okay, which I know someone received a cornea transplant. She did, which she's doing wonderful. Again, it's just the cornea that's recovered. It's not the whole eye. The only time a whole eye is recovered if it's for research, okay, and it's not always recovered, but the eyes would be closed. Tissue, okay, that's bone, skin, heart valves, veins, all that can be donated. But you have clothes on, okay? That's going to be covered. You're not going to be able to see anything, and skin is usually removed from the back of the legs up to the back, so you're not going to see that part. And if they do remove bone, they do put piping back in, so the structure is still there. So you definitely can have an open casket viewing and still be an organ, eye, and tissue donor, okay? Sometimes people are a little worried about that, but you definitely can. My religion is against donation. The only two religions I know that are against donation are the Shintos, which is an Eastern Asian religious group, and the Gypsies, which is a Middle Eastern religious group. But all major religions do believe in donation and giving the gift of life, giving back. Okay, so most religions do believe in organ donation. The rich and the famous. Again, this comes back from TV shows. You know, who has the most money is going to get the organ. And that's not true. There's a whole waiting list. It has to go with blood type, the size. Everything has to, the stars have to align for someone to be able to get a transplant. Okay? It's not because you have the most money. It's where are you on the list? How sick are you? And do you match the person who's able to donate? Okay, so all that has to match up. Blood type, height and weight. Okay, there's other testing that has to happen before you receive that transplant. And there's people that have to wait years before they receive their transplant. And then I know there's stories that I only had to wait a day, or I only had to wait maybe a month. And then you hear people that's like, I've waited years for my transplant, because it varies from person to person, because it all depends on your makeup and what your blood type is and the height and weight and things of that person who's passed who could be a potential donor. Okay. There is a cost to the donor family. Nope. Absolutely no cost to the donor family. There will be no charge whatsoever for anything with the hospital costs that come involved on the donor family. Okay, they're giving a gift. There is no cost to them. I'm too old or I'm too sick to be an organ donor. We get this one quite frequently. And no, there is no age limitation. We have had an 80-year-old donor before. We were able to recover a liver from them. So we never want to put an age limitation on donation. Okay, because you got to think there's still skin, there's still bone, you have the tissue side, corneas, okay, that could still be recovered. I know people are like, well, I wear glasses, my eyes are crap. You're not going to want nothing. It doesn't matter. They might not be crap. They might be fine. Okay, the cornea is just our outer layer to our eye. You know, there's other things that go on more deep in the eye, but we could still use the cornea. Just because you wear glasses does not rule you out to be a cornea donor. Okay? Is there any questions on these so far? Got a question?
No.
No, you're good. Like, I'm good. Yeah.
I have the donor card.
Mhm.
Do they do all the donation to a person before so can I donate things and then still be cremated?
Yes. Yep, they will do the donation first in the hospital. So if you're an organ donor, the tissue and the cornea will come to the hospital usually to help with the recovery. But if they're tissue, they will probably transfer you to their facility to do tissue. It's organ and cornea that will be done in the hospital. And then you would be transported to wherever it would happen, but CTS, which is Community Tissue Services, which is now called Solvita, just kind of an update, which I'm not sure why they made that name change. But there is something about a rising sun, and there's a purpose of that Solvita logo. So, but you would be transferred to their facility for tissue donation, and then your body would be brought to a funeral home for the cremation services. Yes. And again, that transport from the hospital to community tissue, aka Solvita, would not be a cost to you. Okay, we take that cost. No cost to the family for any transport when it's about organ, eye, and tissue donation. Okay, Good question. You can still be cremated and you can still have an open casket viewing. Okay. Anything else? Okay. All right, so Donate Life Ohio. Ohio is a little different. We have 4 OPOs, organ procurement organizations. Like a state like Texas has like 2. So we're a little different. You know, Ohio's not as big, but we still have 4 OPOs, organ procurement organizations. So when I say OPO, that's what that means, organ procurement organization. So you have Life Connection of Ohio, which we service Dayton, as well as Toledo. And Life Center, which is in Cincinnati. Life Bank is in Cleveland. Lifeline is in Columbus. So kind of hit up all the major cities, in Ohio. And then you have Community Tissue Services, again, aka Solvita, Lions Eye Bank of West Central Ohio, they're the ones that come in and do with the cornea, and they'll recover the cornea. And Cincinnati Eye Bank, they do the same thing as Lions Eye Bank. And then we have Eversight, which is in Cleveland, and Central Ohio Lions Eye Bank. So there's different organizations, but we all work together. Okay, we're all for that one mission, and that's to give life with organ, eye, and tissue donation.
Where's your funding come from?
Medicaid and Medicare, we do get reimbursed by that. So when we have all the hospital expenses, we do submit that and then get reimbursed by them. Yeah. Good question. We get that all the time, too.
And I think the question I have is, okay, so you're the blue up there, right? Or, yeah, I guess that's blue. I don't know.
Yes,
Whatever.
this is us.
Yeah, okay. Do the donated tissues only go to the blue?
No, good question. And
Or-
not the organs
or
don't
organs,
just stay in the
anything
blue either.
donated.
Great question. So if someone's an organ donor here in Dayton, and let's say that we're able to recover the kidneys and the liver, those kidneys could go to Toledo, those kidneys could go to Kentucky, those kidneys can go wherever. Because the kidneys are a very versatile organ. We actually have a kidney pump that the kidneys can be put on this pump and they perfuse, which they kind of simulate like they're in the body, which what they do is they kind of filter things out in our body. So this device acts like our body and is filtering through those kidneys. And they can stay on this pump for 2 days, 48 hours. It's the only pump we have that can do that. It'd be great if we had a pump for every organ, but it's just for the kidneys at this time. Modern medicine, who knows where we'll be, okay? There's all kinds of things changing. But for the kidneys, they could go to California if there was someone that's a match with a person of our donor, okay? They could go to California. Now, when you get into the heart and you get into your liver and things like that, you know, the heart is 4 hours outside of the body, and that's it. So once that heart is recovered, it's got to be packaged and shipped. It's got to go either by airplane or by a emergency vehicle that's going. A heart has went to New York before. Okay, we've had a jet take it to New York. And you have to think, when we recover the heart, the person who's receiving that heart is prepped and ready in that OR before it's even gotten there. So they're going to take this heart and they're going to go in the hospital into the room, and then they're going to unpack it and start implanting that. So that's what our coordinators do. They are planning all that out from the time that the organ's out to who's coming to get it, when will it arrive. All that has to be into play. There's so much backstory when it comes to organ donation. There's so much behind the scenes for that person to receive it.
I don't want to get ghoulish, but is that, I mean, essentially you guys are sitting there going, okay, if this happens today, where does this go? Is that kind of what?
So what happens if someone is declared brain dead? We are called from the hospital, and that's when we come into the hospital. So a lot of times we get that, or we just walk in the hospitals waiting for someone, and that's not the case, okay? That's another thing that you see on TV, does not happen. So we get a call, you know, from the hospital saying someone, you know, is going through the brain death testing. And then that's when we come in and we talk with the family and we see if they're registered, and we go through that process and talk with them about organ donation. So that's how we get aware of who is going through the brain death process, is the hospital works with us. All the hospitals work with us to alert us about that. So, and then once that happens and brain death is declared, that's when we start our process and get the patient ready and things like that. But that's not like it happens within a day. You know, sometimes it takes a couple days for a patient to be declared brain dead. So we have been with the family. We have family aftercare people, so they are going to be with them from the start to the very end of our process, to make sure they're okay. Do they need, just from giving them food or water, or just to rub their back, you know, whatever it might be to support the family, that we will be there. But again, it starts when brain death occurs, and then that's when our process starts. But we're not just in the hospital waiting. We wait till we get the phone call from the hospital. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So Donate Life America, you know, you see those magnets, and actually Donate Life is like the big branding. You know, you don't really see Life Connection of Ohio magnets everywhere because you might be like, who's that? What's that about? Donate Life is our national brand. So this is kind of like what it looks like. This is our logo. Okay, so that just kind of makes it more known, during our national campaigns and different things like that. So people are aware, oh, that's Donate Life. Okay, and then we try to educate about our OPOs, our organ procurement organizations. So how to register? Okay, you can go to the BMV. Okay, you can register that way. We do have brochures. Please grab one today at our table. There's always a way to register on the back, and Dawn would be more than happy to help you fill that out if you're not registered. But the biggest way is to go to the BMV and to register that way. When you get your license, or your permit or whatever it might be, they do ask. Now, if you have said yes on your license, they do not have to re-ask you. So when you say yes and it's on there, you will not get an ask ever again until you make it known that you want to change your decision at the BMV. Okay? So once you're in there, you're in there. And it's on the back of our license now, and it's in really small font, and that will say organ donor. It used to have a little red heart in the corner. That is now changed. I'm glad you're a donor.
Really small in the middle.
Really, really small on the back, and it will spell out organ donor very, very tiny. And then once you're in, you're in. And there's nothing else that you have to do. You do not have to put it in a will. It is an advance directive as itself. There's nothing you have to do besides talk to your family. Talk to your loved ones. Let them know what your wishes are. If this is something that you'd like to do, or maybe something you wouldn't want to do, or you just want to do tissue, or you just want to do cornea, you might not want to do organs, have that conversation, okay? And let them know. You can be more specific on the brochure, or if you go online. So when you go online to the BMV website, you can enter your driver's license, and you can be more specific that way. But those BMV representatives aren't going to sit there and be like, do you want tissue? Do you want to do cornea? No. They're going to say, you want to be an organ donor? Okay. And then it's on to the next question, right? So when you're saying yes at the BMV, remember you're saying yes to organ, eye, and tissue donation. It is saying yes to 3. I think I saw your first, and then we'll go to you. Yeah.
You can't be an organ donor if you've donated your body to science.
Correct. So if you want to donate your body to Science to Right State, great program. You can't be both at this time. It would be nice if we could have a little bit of working with them, but at this time they do want the body intact. They want the organs in there for education, which we understand. But again, it's a great program. But if you are on the list to be a Right State University body donor, you would not be able to be an organ donor as well.
Just out of curiosity, since I have the cornea and transplant and done, once an organ has been transplanted, could the cornea be
Can it be
donated again?
reused? Potentially. And I'm not it's rare that it will get retransplanted because it's already been transplanted, but I can't ever say never, because we've had someone who's received a kidney and then they passed away, and that kidney was given to someone else. So again, that kidney's in another person because it's working fine. And it's like, it's just living on, it's been through 3 people already. But sometimes that can happen, but it's rare. It is rare. That it usually does not get retransplanted, but it can if it is functioning pretty well. Absolutely.
What percent of people donate their organs or have that?
Less than 2%
Less
Really?
than 2%.
that are actually able to be an organ donor.
But how about?
Oh, that registered? Oh, the people who have registered in the state of Ohio, we're about over 50% of people who register. We have the highest percentage, Life Connection, in our DSA, our service area. So Dayton and Toledo, ours is about 56%
50%.
that of people who are registered, who said yes. 56% who have said yes. So on a national average, it's about, in Ohio, it's a little over 50%. Yeah.
The most common organ donations?
Kidney.
Kidney.
Kidneys are number one, most common. They're because they're so durable, as well. They're not affected a lot. I mean, they can be, of course, but for transplant purposes, they're a very durable organ to transplant. The one that's really tricky is the pancreas. The pancreas doesn't like touch. Liver is a pretty intensive transplant. The heart, double lung, stuff like that. But your kidneys, they're pretty durable, yes. But yeah, so it's about over 50% of people who are registered. We would love that number to get a little higher because that's still pretty low. I mean, it's a little above average, but it's still low. But less than 2% of people are actually organ donors because it doesn't happen every day and not everybody can be an organ donor. Just because you're registered doesn't mean you're going to be an organ donor. Okay, it doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Okay, only 2% of the people who are eligible
Who are
to
eligible.
donate actually end up doing it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So what are some of the things that preclude someone who's registered from actually being a donor?
If they pass in their sleep,
Okay.
we're not able to do organ donation. The only time organ donation can happen is if they're on a ventilator and in the hospital. So it really depends on the death, how someone passes. That's a big thing. It's a big determining factor, if organ donation can happen. Now, tissue donation could potentially happen. Cornea donation could potentially happen. They do have a little bit different process, and it's okay if the patient passed for a little bit, but not for us, not for organ donation. Because once, the body passes, that oxygenation through our organs start to go, and they're not going to be viable anymore. So we definitely have to have someone who's on a ventilator. So it depends on the death. It depends on how we die. It's if we can be an organ donor or not. And how are things functioning? We don't know. We don't know until we evaluate the person. What's the kidneys number look like? What's our liver function? We don't know. So there's so many factors that come in. But just because it's on my license doesn't mean that I can be an organ donor, because it just depends. It depends on how I pass and how's it functioning at the time of my death.
If you're in an automobile accident, can you?
Depends if you passed at the scene, then no. So if someone's on the scene and they died on scene, they cannot be an organ donor because they're not ventilated. And that oxygenation of those organs are gone. Now, in an automobile accident and they get to the hospital, they put on a ventilator, then yes. Because that's still putting that oxygen through that body. And then they could be declared potentially brain dead because of the severe impact of their brain and including their brain stem from the accident.
So Stephanie, will either of you be around for a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're gonna do, we need to transition to our next talk. So first of all, let's thank Stephanie.
Yeah, you guys are great. Thank
Very important topic.
you. Thank you.
And what we're gonna do is just reset the room a little bit for our next talk. So give us about 5 minutes, don't go too far, and we'll get to the next thing. So again, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Wasn't even looking at the time. You guys are great.
That's my job. You might
So you think we should just go ahead and call in and set up? Call that Larry?
No.
What she told me was, I have 2 other lawyers in my office, so ask for me. I am setting new appointments in February. Those are the words she said.
But thank you.
I gotta talk to you about work. Where and when can you do What about?
Yeah, well, we can always set an appointment and change it.
Yeah.
Well, I have to, because I'm not even gonna go home.
I mean, what I would like is if I didn't, if I don't care about the financial consequences, meaning whether it's the beginning of the year or you've already used up your. If I ignore that, then I'd probably want to do it at the end of January. That'll all depend on whether this doesn't get, if this doesn't get okay, then maybe figure out this.
But we should get that.
But I'm pretty confident between this.
I just didn't want to have to.
It's very long months.
Also, that's Kaiser there. And then we also have Bob and Scooter running around. There are care dogs here at the funeral home. I might touch on that a little bit in the next talk, but we're animal people here. And we get to bring our dogs forward and they like hanging out with people.
Got the
So,
back one,
yeah.
and they decided.
And if Kaiser randomly stares and bites, that's completely
Not
normal.
bad, did you notice it?
I was not expecting.
I said, well, how much do I have left? He said, oh, you might have 10 times. Go ahead.
I think they're good.
Yeah, they already did the vertebrae. Now they're doing vertebrae. Yeah, it's in the road. It's costing a fortune, but it'll be done. It'll be good for 5 years. Well, I've had the car about 5 years, so that makes sense. I'm glad I took it. I wasn't gonna take it, because at first I thought, well, it's just them telling me that the car's done. And I was glad I walked out and took it, because.
Oh, right. Exactly.
I want you to get
That's
It's advanced.
ready.
Oh, and you got the agenda. Can I take a?
Do you guys want water before we get started?
I didn't print it.
That's where I saw that.
So 11 o'clock is.
Oh, you're sticking me in that.
You're in the wheelchair, okay.
Really? All right, let's get our panelists in place.
Might sooner have them around here.
We're putting you in the middle. Sit wherever you want. I've already, I know.
Ain't none in here. I think they're. This one right here, I know her.
You sit in there, I will.
She's from Cincinnati.
Spring Road.
No.
Yeah, I know. Is Sam back here?
Which one?
Arlington.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the name.
I don't have it taken in here.
I still got your card.
You do? Okay. I gotta get you a different card. I'm at a different cemetery.
Oh, yeah, that's not the one, is it?
I was at Happy Cemetery.
Yeah. I
All right, we're gonna get started back up here as soon as the man with water arrives.
Okay. Thank you.
Bobby Boucher.
Bobby Boucher.
All right, the reason why I put this segment here is because I knew you guys wanted to eat lunch and wouldn't leave. No, that's not the reason. What we're going to talk about next is we're going to talk about pre-planning your actual ceremony, cemetery, memorial planning, all of that, okay? And what we have is we have a couple of folks here. First of all, see, this is ridiculous. We get up on this. This is Angie. Angie is from Woodland Cemetery and Arboretum in Dayton, Ohio. One of the most beautiful and historic cemeteries in the area. And so she's going to talk about traditional cemetery pre-planning. Along with that, Amy here is from Arlington Memorial Gardens, which is down in the Fairfield area of Cincinnati. And it is more of a, what I'd say, more recent modern flush marker cemetery. And so she will talk about, and we can talk a little bit about the differences. You can ask those questions. Then I have Sam and Erica that are from Route Song Funeral Home. They will talk a little bit about what you need to consider as you go through the pre-planning of your funeral. Kaiser's going to talk about, what are you going to talk about, Kaiser? And then what I'll do is just talk about the general conversation about just memorialization. And when I talk about that, more of a permanent memorialization, not so much end-of-life celebration. So what I'd like to do is start with Sam and Erica and let them just have a little conversation with you about how and what you should consider when pre-planning, and I want this to be interactive. So as you have questions, shout them out, and we will work through this. So Sam and Erica, why don't you guys talk about pre-planning?
Ladies first.
Well, again, my name's Erica. I am a funeral director and embalmer here at Route Song. I've been here, since October 24th. I've been here 2 years now. But I've been in the funeral industry for about 7.5 years. Just a little bit about myself there. But, when it comes to pre-planning, a lot of the times how I like to tell families is, it's how you want to be remembered, celebrated, leave your legacy. It also helps with your family and having that, not so fun discussion, about your plans. It also opens the door so that, you can start that discussion with your family, and so that they also know what you want, and also you also know how you will be remembered and how you want your funeral or, memorial to be, and then it kind of starts with making a phone call with the funeral home. So, and then from there, we sit down, talk about what you're looking for. We go over specifically funeral, the cremation, burial, all of that. And then we also go over obituary, vital statistical information. We go kind of deep into everything just to make sure we have everything covered. But that's a little bit of a lowdown of it.
And I have one part that I'd like to add to Erica's story too. I think there's, at least in the funeral home side of things, there's two ways people get into this. You're either born into it or you're born to do it. Erica is born to be a funeral director. This is her passion, and I'm so glad to have her here. She just takes excellent care of our families. Obviously, I'm born into it. And I'll just say, initially, I was hesitant to get into the industry. It's not like having the family bake shop or it's something a little bit more upbeat. It's a little different, but I grew up different because I was about 4 or 5 years old playing hide and seek with my brother in the casket room. Right, that's a little out there.
They never found his brother.
What's Bub and Scooter's dad? But right here where I'm at now, I got into the business right after I got out of school, and I've learned that there's maybe, in my opinion, maybe like a handful of jobs that you really get to make an impact in somebody's life. And this is one of them. Being a funeral director to help people in the most difficult time of their life is the most rewarding feeling when I have a family come up to me and say, I couldn't have done this without you, or you made the impossible possible in a way, right? Because there's some interesting requests that people have. Not all funerals are one size fits all. And I guess if there's one thing I would like you guys to take away from this conversation, even if it isn't one size fits all, do something, okay? I had somebody ask me a number of years ago, who's your biggest competition in Dayton, Ohio? And I thought for a second, and the way I see it, I am not worried about what other people are doing. I know I'm confident in what we do here, but my biggest competition, and I'll be very honest about it, it is a direct cremation with no service, no memorial, no nothing. Essentially, the way I see it, people have been having funerals and remembrances for eons. That's how we know about people prehistory, right? We know that they had that sense of connection with their loved ones, and I talk a little bit more about this in my speech tomorrow, but if you don't do something, you are fighting the entire history of humanity, we've always done something for our loved ones and for the people that have gone before us. It is part of who we are, and I can't stress that enough. I would love you to use my funeral home. I don't care if you don't. I don't not care. All I'm saying is you gotta do something for your family. It can be small, you can have a big thing. We do beer and wine and all that kind of stuff here, big party, but you gotta do something. And so that's, if I may, that's the one thing I want you to take away from this.
And to piggyback on what both of them said, the thing that I feel is most important, a lot of people don't fully embrace. Have a conversation with your family, because newsflash, you're dead. So really, I appreciate what you want, but you're not going to really care at that point. Have a conversation with your family and your friends to at least get input. I'll tell you this story earlier this year. I think I said this, I lost my nephew to suicide. And it spurred a lot of conversations around the table. And one of the conversations was my wife's dad was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have an open casket. The second he said that, every one of his children said, no, you're not. And so there was a conversation, because that's what he knew, right? Rural Southeast Ohio. You want to have an open casket because that's what you do. After having a conversation with his 3 children and his wife, it was like, okay, so maybe I don't. So I'm not saying to bow to your children or your wife's wishes. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is at least have the conversation so you know, and at least have input of what they want, because they're going to be the ones remembering you. And I think that's really important. So the next step we're going to do is you're already in the funeral home, right? You made the first big step. Most people are scared to step foot in a place like this. You're already halfway there. So you've made your plans. You're going to be shot up in rockets, or you're going to have a big send off. We're going to party at the beach. And now it's time to figure out, you know what? I need to find a resting place, because contrary to Ohio Revised Code, cremation is not final disposition, it's preparation. And so you're going to need to pick a place. And so Angie and Amy are going to talk about places you can pick. We'll start with Angie.
So since everybody has started off with their background, I'll start off with mine, because I wasn't born into it. But going off of what Sam was saying about Erica, it was always just something I wanted to help people. I started off in retail, believe it or not. I was in retail management for almost 25 years. Some of you may know me from Bombay Company, if you remember, at Dayton Mall or Town and Country. Others, if you've shopped Talbot's, you've probably seen me there. But I always got a connection with either my clients or mostly with my staff. So it was, what could I give my staff that the company wasn't, providing to them? So when I was recruited by a client of Talbot's, at first I was like, holy cow, no way. I'm the biggest scaredy cat. I would be the kid driving past the cemetery holding a gun. And then the more I got into it, the more it just, 12 years later, here I am, trying to make that impact on people's lives. And it is, like we've been saying, it's your family that we're helping. I just last week, and it broke my heart, on Monday, we will be having a service for a gentleman who called for himself from hospice to make his arrangements with us. He had no family, he had no executor. So the funeral home was trying to figure out how to make his arrangements for him, what legally they can do, and we still have paperwork that needs signed off, and we need to figure out who's doing that. But at the end of the day, come Monday, it will be that funeral director and how many people I can get out of Woodland staff so that he doesn't go out by himself. And that's the most heartbreaking thing. I know with conversations on my own parents, it's been often I say you create your community, your neighborhood, and that's what Woodland is there. Really, I find is that if I take a family out, they're like, there's my minister. I went to school with that person. That was my teacher. This is my neighbor. My parents are doing the exact same thing. They probably 99.9% will not be at Woodland Cemetery down at UD. They will be over at Calvary, because guess what? My parents go to St. Albert's, and all of their friends are going to Calvary. So I already know that's the decision. But a conversation that I've had with my parents is cremation or casket. Because by the time you reach mine or Amy's doorstep, your family has been through at least 3 or 4 hours of conversation of what your service is going to look like. So they look just exhausted by the time they reach my doorstep. And so my parents finally came out. My mom's like, I am definitely cremation. My dad's like, I'm not quite sure which one I want. But at least we know those things. You know, so at the end, probably it will be my dad will be a casket. You know, but we haven't gotten to the conversation of open casket. Like fully, I already know my mom would be like, I don't want people walking past my box looking at me. My dad might be like, you know, that's how my parents did it, you know, so we'll do what we can to honor him. But at the end of the day, the cemetery, you know, is the place of comfort, you know, like, I want people to be comfortable just going to a cemetery. We're more than just grief, you know. We give church, we are an arboretum, we are a place of, you know, streets and protected driveways that we don't have a lot of traffic going through. So you can walk, you can run, you can walk your dog on leashes and pick up after them. You know, but all of that is to say is we are there to help you through that grief stage. You know, and so if it's monumental or flush graves, you know, we can help you with that. But at the end of the day, you know, our true purpose is to take care of you as the deceased and your family that come to us after.
Want to quickly describe the final destination, final disposition options that you have at Woodland as far as cremation, mausoleum, that kind of stuff?
So Woodland, we're 200 acres, we're 120 operating acres right now. We are developing. Cremation is taking an uptick. We're about 60% cremation right now. We offer cremation burial out on the grounds. You can bury on an existing grave or on just a cremation grave. We do biodegradable urns, direct pour into any grave. We have our fountain garden, which is our in-ground scattering garden, and there's a shared obelisk for that. Otherwise, you can have any memorial that the grave will allow for, because all of our graves are laid out to what memorialization can go on that, how we can get the equipment through. If you are one of those people who are afraid of water, afraid of bugs, or afraid of the dark, we do have the mausoleum options where we have crypts for caskets or glass fronted or marble fronted niches for the urns. We also have outdoor columbariums or niches that are at our High Point, the Lookout, or several of them out in the Southern District as well. We have a lot of different options. It's just a matter of what is it that you're looking for and what would your family be most comfortable with visiting. Some people want to see UD as your background. Some people want to be close by the Wright brothers, by family. So we'll do whatever we can to get you what you need or want.
Thank you.
All right, so I see some familiar faces here, but I'll introduce myself for those of you who have not yet met. My name's Amy Thee, and I'm a family care advisor at Arlington Memorial Gardens and Funeral Home. Any Cincinnati people here? Okay, wonderful.
If you let it in.
Any Bengals fans? More hands, good, good. All right, well, I came into this work, because I was born for it, not born into it. Back in 2021, I was, scrolling and I saw a news article, monkeys loose in cemetery. And I was like, interesting, I wonder if they're hiring. And they were hiring. So that is what started my career in family service. I started with the Catholic cemeteries. And so what that position is, it's meeting with families, sometimes after a death has occurred, driving the families around, showing them a tour of the property, and much like Angela here, showing them cremation options versus casketed burial options, mausoleum versus scattering, and going through those options with them. Ideally, we're doing that ahead of time, right? And those appointments are much easier when both the husband and the wife are still living, and they're pre-planning, they're doing advanced planning. From there, I actually attended this festival last year, and I can honestly say it changed my life. That's where I met people from Arlington Cemetery, where they have both the funeral home and permanent placement options or the cemetery options. And I, of course, fell in love with that idea of being able to take a family from start to finish through cemetery options and their funeral pre-planning arrangements. I'm not a funeral director, so if a death has occurred, please call Sam or Erica and not me. But if you're just making plans for yourself or a loved one, that is a passion of mine, and I really have found a very meaningful work in it. So Angela touched on this. At Arlington, we also have a lot of different options, although I've never heard of an open pour. You'll have to explain what that is to me. What really I hope each of you take away today is that these choices do matter. And sadly, a lot of the time, I find the very reason that people do not want to make these choices. They don't want to do it because it's too hard to think about, or it's too emotional, or the cost is prohibitive. Those very reasons that they say they don't want to do it, that's exactly what they stand to gain from doing it in advance. If you think it's difficult to sit here with a spouse while both of you are alive and well and talk about cremation or casket, imagine if now your spouse isn't there and you're having to think about that without them while grieving. And it's heartbreaking, and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. So I know I've had that conversation with my spouse, and he's tired of me asking him questions. But I'm glad that I know. I know what he wants. I know what he does not want. And I hope that from each of you in this room. Another reason people don't want to prearrange is because they have this notion that it's selfish. A lot of people say, well, I don't really care. I want something simple. I want it to be easy. I don't want a queen's funeral, right? Again, by advanced planning, that's the simplest route. Waiting is often the most complicated and burdensome way to go about those plans. So having a plan in place, it's like night and day. Driving around a couple that's still alive and well and making jokes, showing them your options, that is a much easier appointment than driving around a grieving spouse and trying to explain all the options that she has. It's an honor, and I am honored to do that. And oftentimes I do have a much deeper connection with that person because of that experience, but it's difficult. It is really, really difficult for the grieving families to do so. Okay.
All right, so I guess the next thing I'm gonna give you try to give you my Cliff Note version so that we have time for you to ask a lot of questions. I am president of Dodds Memorials out of Xenia. We are 164 years old this year, and we are Ohio's largest memorial company. I'm a third generation memorialist, and I sat right in the middle of Dodd's office and swore I'd never work there. So life has a way of It didn't work out that way, and I'm very blessed that I had the opportunity to basically do my dad's job while I was on vacation in Hawaii, and I've been kind of doing it ever since. What I'm passionate about, obviously, the reason why I brought this festival is that I feel everybody needs to memorialize in one way or the other. Would I love for every one of you to go to Woodland and buy 20 graves and put a big mausoleum on it? Sure I would, but that's not what I'm about. What I'm passionate about is I want you to have a place where the genealogists of 200 years from now, the great-great-great-grandkids of 100 years from now, go and they get to figure out where you are. Because you know what? Records burn, digital media disappears. Your final resting place is going to be the way that people find out about you. And whether that's in a small ceramic cenotaph, which we offer that can be stuck on the back of a family monument, to something like Roger Glass did a year ago, putting something that looks like the Parthenon in Calvary Cemetery. We can do anything that you want. So don't look at a memorial as necessarily expensive. And pre-planning is important because, piggybacking on what Amy said, it's cheaper now than it'll ever be in the future. You get to make the choice while you're alive and you have your spouse with you, and you don't put that burden on anybody else. So those are the three real big reasons to do that at this point. A lot of things, be careful. Amy's Beautiful Cemetery, they have sections where you can only have a flat bronze marker. There are sections in Woodland where you can only have a certain size marker. You need to have conversations with your cemetery. I'm on a cemetery board. I've got certain places where you can and can't do things. Have conversations about the cemeteries you're interested in. Ask specific questions about what you can have on the graves. Understand that you're going to have the purchase of the grave plus opening and closing plus probably a foundation sometime in the future. Be informed before you make that final decision. And if you're working with good, reputable people like the people up here, they're going to walk you through that and they're going to give you an honest assessment of that to help you out. Because there's so many times I've had people walk in and say, I want this, and we go and find out in their section or in their cemetery they can't have that. Well, what do you mean I can't have that? So make sure as you're making these decisions, it fits who you want to be and how you want to be remembered. But I encourage you that everybody deserves some kind of memory. And if you are one of those folks that choose to be shot up in fireworks, which yes, you can do, that's your choice. But I want you to make that choice out of education and knowledge, not out of ignorance. I want you to understand that there are so many options that people don't even realize, whether they're public options in the cemetery, whether they're private options in the cemetery. My grandma was in a boulder in my mom's backyard for 10 years before she ended up at a cemetery. So there are lots of options and choices, and don't just assume there's not, because there are. So with that, what I'm going to do is open it up, and you can just ask any question you want. Let us have it.
Where do you get your granite?
So my granite comes from all over the world. Primarily our granites are North American, but we do get certain, like the jet blacks, you see the etchings out in the cemetery. You can't get jet black in the United States, it doesn't exist. It's either going to come from Africa, India, or China. Okay, so and it's not really granite if you want to get geological, it's called a gabbro, but it is an igneous rock and we do get that. But most of our granite's going to be domestic. Blue pearl, people love blue pearl. It comes from Norway, not Sweden. It's not Swedish blue pearl, it's Norwegian. But places all over the world have granite. We have a lot in Canada. The primary manufacturing in the United States happens in Minnesota, up in Vermont, or down in Alberta, Georgia. So those are the places we get most of our granite.
Do you have the Brazilian?
We have had Brazilian before. Brazilian granite makes great countertops. Doesn't do real well in monuments because they can't make pieces big enough. And that's why we don't have a lot of Brazilian. You know, some people come in and say, I want Ubatuba. I said, well, you can't get a monument in Ubatuba because it's just they don't quarry it in those sizes to be. Let me get behind you, Randy, and then I'll get you in.
I have two questions, actually. One, I'm curious about the direct pour also. And two, let me ask you real quick. I don't understand, I'm not sure how it works with memorials. Does Dodds Memorials, can they do a marker for only local cemeteries, or would you be able to do a marker for like northern Ohio?
It's unusual for us to do out of town, but usually if we can find a partner like another Rock of Ages dealer or what we consider a reputable memorial company, then we can usually work it out between them. There's probably going to be a little extra charge for what they do. But depending, we can at least give it a shot and try. If nothing else, I'm going to give you good information to make sure you're dealing with a reputable dealer and not somebody who's going to do things to a piece of granite that's going to make it change in 10 years.
Okay.
Question about direct pour.
So we have just about every day somebody asking, can they just scatter someone on top of a grave? We do not permit that. With the equipment going through, you're not gonna stay there. And we have a lot of visitors throughout the property and we don't want people walking through you. So we came up with, at first, our fountain garden. So if you're familiar with Woodland, we have that pond down there and there used to be an overgrown area. Well, we discovered that there actually was an upper pool to that fountain or to that pond. So we used the garden between the pond and the upper basins, and that's where all of the in-ground scattering takes place. So we will still do a hole, and then we can pour directly the cremated remains into that grave and cover it up. It will not have a memorialization over it in that instance. We have a large 3-sided obelisk, and your name would be placed on the obelisk as a shared memorial. We have people who want their own memorial, so we will open up any grave to do the same thing the same way. So if you say, I want to have an upright monument and I want to be by my parents, we can still do a grave site in that manner and then just have the family or Woodland staff will pour the cremated remains in the grave and then cover the grave. You can also do biodegradable. I think we've done salt rock before. So if you're not comfortable with the direct, the only thing that people have to remember is that if we do any digging, when we put the dirt back, you may not all go back to you. But we recycle all of our dirt at Woodland, so we'll reuse it. So you may go visit somebody else. That's the one thing about a direct pour is that we can't guarantee that if we do another burial on that grave that you all go back.
You may be traveling.
If I may, one caveat to what you were just explaining. Also, urn choice is very important to what your final dispositions should be, okay? So if you're going into the mausoleum, I would suggest a certain type of urn. Not everything can always fit in there.
Yeah, and make
right?
sure you know the dimensions of your niche
Very
before
key.
you buy your urn, or if you bought the urn, please let us know when you're looking for niches, because the urn companies and the niche companies don't always talk to one another, and we may not be able to accommodate certain urns. So that's a big problem.
Angie and Amy love people walking in saying, can I put this in the niche? No.
Might have to talk about that.
No problem.
Yeah, and then you have a gently used urn, and then it's like, well, what do you
You can find those on eBay. Gently used urn.
Well, it's one owner.
Well, I'll just donate that to somebody who may need it. Yeah.
But yeah, and again, if you're doing in-ground burial, you can go eco-friendly with it. Find something that returns to the earth naturally. A lot of people did that. I did that with my grandparents personally when they chose cremation. Not uncommon. Sometimes people want to have a sturdy urn. If you buy that nice glass cloisonne and you say, I want to put this in the ground, I'm going to say it's going to last all about 5 minutes before it breaks, probably. So,
Which you can do an urn vault. Woodland doesn't require urn vaults. I don't know if does yours.
You do, yeah.
Yeah, so we leave it optional to the family. So it's just a matter of, like Sam said, how quickly do you want to return it?
yeah, so just an idea for when you're thinking about urns, one of the thousands of details, but just a point I like to make.
So can I ask a clarifying question? Urn vault, describe that.
It's a plastic box, basically, that is reinforced that allows you to put the urn into it and then it doesn't crush when it's underground. Similar to a casket vault but made up of polyester, just
Yeah.
some type of.
It also
heavy
comes in
plastic.
steel.
Yeah, there's all different kinds, but the idea is that it protects the urn so that the
As,
weight of the earth does not.
as the casket vault.
So you
protects the
require
casket.
urn vaults for all urns.
Correct. The only time we would not require an urn vault is if we were to do a scattering. We have a lake scattering and then a ground scattering option. And then most of our niches, which would be like either along the side of our mausoleum wall or we have some freestanding ones, the vast majority of them include an urn. So again, I have people come to me years after cremation has taken place. They bought this beautiful $500 urn, and then I have to sit there and tell them that it needs to be now transferred into the copper urn so that it will fit. So all things you want to consider.
The big one in Cincinnati, like Woodland here, is Spring Grove. You know their rules on urns?
I try not to speak for other cemeteries.
Always pass the con to the cemetery director.
Yes, but
Sure, you
yeah.
can do whatever you want.
Right.
It's something we haven't talked about that really, I don't know if you guys are moving the direction, either of your cemeteries, but there are cemeteries that are starting to open up what's called natural burial. And where you can either be buried in a shroud or wicker basket. They are a little bit different because if you're burying a body in the ground without anything to keep the ground from moving once the body decays, you can't really service that ground as far as mowing and what have you. And so it's usually a natural overgrown area. And there are some cemeteries in the Dayton area that have that, and they're getting more and more popular. So it's not cremation, you're not embalmed, it's literally the ashes to ashes, dust to dust kind of thing that happens in natural burial. So that is an option out there as well.
On that
You
note,
doing that? What did you just say?
I think it's coming down the pike, but we don't have natural burial options at this time.
Right.
Yeah.
on that note, the only place we require embalming is in the mausoleum. You have to be embalmed if you're going in the mausoleum. Otherwise, for Woodland, out on the grounds, you can have the wicker basket, you can have the muslin cloth. We have several faiths that want to be in contact with the earth. So we'll do a couple of different things for them where maybe it's just leaving the vault, are all of you familiar? I keep using this word vault. Are you familiar with what that is?
Yes.
Okay, so leaving the lid off will lower the casket and then the family can place dirt in. They could fill the whole vault and then we would put the dirt, the lid on top of it. We might also get a vault that is what's called a bottom seal so that the dome just sits on the top so that equipment can still go over it, but then the body is in contact with the earth. Or we do have older parts of the cemetery where we can do that burial that we know that isn't visited and that we could let it go to more of a wild aspect of it. So we do have those different types. It's just a matter of, we always say, what shade of green do you want?
Well, and that's important because congressional in DC does the same thing. If you can use just the vault dome and put it over top the casket, it might be a conversation you have with even your local cemetery because they probably haven't thought of that. And again, it provides, like Angie said, protection to keep the ground from sinking, but you are completely in contact with the earth underneath that vault top. So there's a lot of things that you might even educate your own cemetery about that might help you as far as to fulfill the wishes that you.
So in Ohio.
Hang on, I got somebody right behind you.
What's the ballpark cost of a cemetery plot and a memorial? I mean, just, ballpark.
2,000 to 20,000. I mean, it's that. I mean, anytime you're talking about our industry, rural versus city, it just depends on a lot of different things. Whether you're talking about an exclusive part of the cemetery, if you're in a mausoleum, if you're in a glass niche, is the niche up facing a lake versus back in the corner? There's so many variables. It's like when people walk in and say, "How much does mine cost?" 500 to 50,000. I mean, it's so hard to do that. I don't know if you ever throw an average price.
Well, for us, it really comes down to you need to make a couple of decisions first. Do Do you want casket or cremation? Do you want to be out on the grounds or do you want to be in the mausoleum? And then if you're out on the grounds, what kind of memorial do you want? So the spaces aren't sold with the memorial, but like I said, they're laid out to what kind of memorial it can have. Once I have that, then I could say maybe in the southern district, which is south of Stewart Street, for the grave, the open and close, and if they did a memorial through Woodland, then they're probably looking at, for one person, about $7,000-8,000 just for the space open and close, and then you'd put the memorial. But we were talking about Brazilian granite. Granite is, you've got your beer granite and you get your champagne granite. So, an average cost for an upright monument through Woodland would be about $4,000. So you're looking at $11,000.
Just an Ohio foundation has to be 32, is recommended to be 32 inches deep.
Yeah, recommended is the term, because there's not many cemeteries that will pour that deep.
Right.
Frost line in this part of Ohio is about 19-20 inches. So you at least want to get down below that. But yeah, those are conversations you have with because I've got some cemeteries that literally dig down 4 inches, put crushed limestone, and that's their foundation. So those are questions that as you're living, you can ask. Because if you're in the fog of grief, you're not saying, so how do you pour your foundation? You're not thinking of that, right? Those are the good things about doing things pre-planned, is to have those kind of conversations. Because to Angie's point, single grave, 2 graves, what part of the cemetery, what do you like? There's so many different things. Having those conversations now really help you to nail that down. And you know what? If you're pre-planning and we all get together and the total is $20,000 and you have 10, you now can save for what you want, right? You now know what the budget is. So those are good things to have instead of getting, and I say, want this, and you've only got this much left. It allows you to budget as well when you go forward, which is another great pre-planning option.
Well, and you can also ask any one of us if you have payment plans.
Yep.
Woodland does have payment plans. I know that you work through insurance as well as
All kinds of stuff, assignments.
Randy, you go you first.
I'm curious if there's not a cemetery involved, like in a cremation, going to spread their ashes or something like that. Tell me what you've done in terms of the funeral home for a celebration in those circumstances.
Great question. First caveat, got to talk about our general price list. It's right over there on the other table. Is for your retention if you'd like to see it. I'm legally required to say that. So there we are. A lot of the time, there's a silver lining with cremation, because in a funeral, like a traditional burial, we are kind of, I wouldn't say required, but it's in our best interest to have things happen as soon as possible. When we do a cremation and we move forward with cremation, that gives us a little bit more time. So that's kind of one of those things I like to always bring up, is you got more options as far as timing goes with cremation. So I've had memorial services for folks a year after the fact. And we especially saw that during COVID, just because folks didn't necessarily want to gather right away. And that's how we got started with the live streaming and all that kind of stuff too. So you have more options when it comes to cremation. A lot of the time, what we like to do is we can still do essentially the same thing that we would do for a burial. So I always tell folks, I want to make the service as meaningful as possible. And there's a couple different ways that we can do that. We obviously want to show off somebody's life. We want to show their memories, show what they love doing. So we see all these TVs around here. We love putting pictures, putting together a slideshow for families. That way they can see parts of somebody's life. I like to have music that is appropriate for them. I've had everything from Snoop Dogg to Metallica in here. It helps to set the atmosphere and the vibe where people come in, and then they can kind of get a sense of it. Sometimes people want to party. We do beer and wine services, food, all that kind of stuff here. It's different when you sit down across from somebody and you have food versus going through that receiving line, right? The receiving line, it's kind of like, so sorry for your loss. You know, you hear a lot of those same tropes, right? But when you get down sitting across from each other and sharing a beer or wine or sharing food, that's where the real healing process starts, right? Because you see that picture over there? Man, I remember when we went on that trip back in '95 or whatever it was. And then that's where you start talking. That's where you start actually making those connections and finding the meaning of everything. So I guess to answer your question, I like to have my services be as meaningful as possible. I've started services where we brought in the Harley, and that's how we started the service. We turned the dang thing on, and we revved the engine. It took an hour or two to get the fumes out, but totally worth it because that guy, he lived to ride his Harley, and that's what we did. That's how we started the service. Had a 200-pound geode in there before. Those are the kind of cool things that I love to do. And what was it last week where the guy he owned a car company, and so he probably had 2 or 3 Corvettes plus all of his Porsches and all that kind of stuff. And the first 10 cars in that procession is probably like $1 million worth of cars going through. So I was like, man, that is cool. I was out there taking pictures of all the cars, to be honest with you.
You can't take it with you, but you can drive it to the grave.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Drive it to the cemetery.
So hopefully that answers your question. You know, putting parts and pieces of somebody, that's where the real meaning is. Showing off their life, that's what it's about. You can do that with burial or cremation. Makes no difference. You still set up the same way, you still do the same thing.
Yeah, I have a question. Are you aware of the fact that the cavalry won't take pots or glass containers that the flowers are in?
So I'm somewhat aware, and I would tell you that the practical reason for things like that is breakage.
Okay, but the person that's sending it thinks it's gonna go with them. Is the florist in any way, I don't wanna say obligated, but shouldn't they be able to put it in something that would be biodegradable?
If they know that that's the regulation, and depending on where the florists come from, and that's where working with the local funeral home, the local florist, and making sure, because sometimes the florist, they just know it's going to the funeral home. They don't know what cemetery it is.
Right.
And so talking to the funeral home and saying, hey, this is going to Calvary, are there any, and unfortunately people don't know that, but hopefully your local funeral home that works a lot with Calvary would say, oh yeah, here, by the way, we need to do this. But, you know, unfortunately, the left hand doesn't always know what the right hand's doing in that moment.
Yeah, we had gotten stuck with a lot of flowers, you know, just because they wouldn't take them and they weren't in anything that would be okay.
Well, to answer that question further as well is, it also depends on who sends flowers. It's also, you know, in your obituary, you can do it in lieu of flowers, if you
Yeah.
like donations somewhere. Or if you don't do that, you know, sometimes we have these beautiful pieces that are on the tables today. And it is glass, so it's not necessarily sent to the cemetery. However, it also depends on the cemetery. I know we're specifically talking about Calvary, but they may not even take plastic. So we can't take baskets. We can take standing easels, obviously the casket spray, and any plastic ones. So, but it also depends on the cemetery. Okay.
But again, those are conversations you can have with the cemetery pre-need that you can't have on
That's
the
And the cavalry is the one I'm talking about.
Yes, and also just specifically, that's a good question for a funeral director as well, because we can assist you by reaching out to the cemetery and just, you know, let florists know, because a lot of the population will not necessarily know that you want most of the flowers at the cemetery as well as the funeral home. So that's a good question, because if anybody orders flowers off of our website personally, we can always give a phone call, you know, to the florist, and we can tell them, hey, instead of glass bottoms, let's all use plastic, because we want to bring them to the cemetery or something of that nature.
We've got a few more minutes. I'm letting this go a little long, but we got about 4 more minutes for some questions, and then we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
It's probably more for Sam, maybe Amy. Have you guys, there's a trend now towards living funerals. Have you done any of those here where you're kind of, and I think it probably more comes into play with those individuals who have life-limiting diseases. They know the end is near, so I want to have this celebration and I want to sit in the back of the room and hear what people are going to say about me versus, right, waiting until, you know.
I love that question. I've not had any of those yet. I don't know if either of you have done a living one. Okay.
Have you?
No, never.
Oh.
How was it?
It was very interesting. Let's just say, well, it's because it's not necessarily awkward to an extent. I think it was amazing. But when you give a eulogy and the person is sitting right next to you, it's more of a party celebration.
It's like a roast.
Sometimes. It kind of felt more like a birthday party, but it wasn't their birthday. It was definitely a celebration of their life, but also it was, it was something that it was an honor for me to be a part of, just because they had brain cancer and she knew she was going to pass away in a matter of months. And she decided to have her, so she wanted to be cremated, and she's like, oh, I just want to do a direct cremation. She's like, you know what? That's boring. I want to be a part of my own funeral. So I'm going to have a celebration of my life while I'm still living. And then she went forward with a direct cremation, service after the fact. But we got memorial folders. She helped me plan all of that. And it was very beautiful. And it was heartbreaking because we all knew the end of her life was near. But when the time did come, it was and I almost get choked up on it too, because it was a beautiful, beautiful thing that I was just honored to be a part of. And it was just amazing to have her even tell her own story and why she wanted to do her own funeral to begin with. I think it might start being more mainstream, but I know it's more popular in California and that kind of stuff, but hopefully it comes to Ohio. But I have done one in almost my 8 years of being.
I got chills listening to you.
Yeah, in the funeral industry, but she was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful soul, and I'm very happy that, and honored that we could have done something for her while she was still living, so that she knows how, it brought everybody together. And that's what Sam said, when it comes to, your funeral, you're not necessarily here, but it brings your family together, and that's what she wanted. She wanted all of her friends, family to come out and honor her legacy, so that she could see the turnout and see all of that, instead of just having that direct cremation that she may have only have had. So,
Thank you.
One more, back there.
My husband wants a traditional funeral. I would be cremated. And I told my kids, if I die first, just put me on the shelf. And then if he dies next, then can I go into the casket with him and do that?
It's important for the cemetery to know you're in there for record keeping and what have you. We have, like I said, I'm on the cemetery board, and there's times when we find out way up the fact that somebody ended up somewhere. It's important for us, and sometimes they'll charge a deed fee, sometimes not, but it's important for us to know who's in the cemetery, because that allows us to keep records. When Susie from 50, 75 years says, I'm looking for Uncle Johnny, we don't even know, well, I know he's in here, we don't even know Uncle Johnny's there. So it's very important to just make sure that you're accounting for that when that happens.
Well, we've got our headstone and it has both of us there. It's just on a single lot. So, if he dies first.
Talk to your cemetery.
Yeah, if he dies first, then I could be put on top of it.
Right.
Casket, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like she said, talk to your cemetery.
Yeah.
They, if you were to die first, Woodland would still do the burial. And then for him, we would just temporarily lift you, put his vault in the ground, and then put your urn on top of that vault.
Okay.
My boss.
Erica can attest that my father's urn was placed in my mother's casket under her arm, exactly where she wanted it. And David's cemetery was very aware that we were actually burying 2 bodies that day in a double plot, but it wouldn't have mattered if it were single.
So we're gonna wrap up here. The one thing I'm just gonna take about a minute, I'm gonna jump on my soapbox real quick. Cremation, no issue with cremation. I just brought my father home yesterday, he was cremated, okay? I have no issue with cremation. My problem is what people determine cremation to be. It's not final disposition, folks, it's preparation. I always ask this question, I want to, by a show of hands, how many of you would be comfortable with a casket in your garage? With the body inside of it? Show of hands. Okay, understand that a cremated body inside of an urn is a smaller version of the same thing. Okay? I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not telling you that. I just want you to understand what we're talking about. It seems like when we condense somebody down to this, there's this disconnect that happens that's no longer a body. You'll never hear me use the term cremains. You will never hear me use the term ashes. It is a cremated body because it is still a body. And I'm always afraid that when people stop talking about it as a body, they stop thinking of it as a body. If you want that body on the mantle and that's what you should choose, that is your choice. I just want you to get fully educated on the fact that when you cremate, there are so many final resting places because guess what? I've talked to auctioneers that have walked into houses and they've opened a closet and Uncle Harry and Aunt Maud and are all stacked up side by side. You have to understand that once you die, who's going to take care of that cremated body? I'm not telling you not to. I'm not telling anybody that has a cremated body at home to feel bad. I'm just telling you, make sure you're thinking about these things because that is not the final disposition of that body. That body will eventually end up somewhere, and I'd rather you choose where that body goes than the auctioneer or somebody else that happens into it down the road. And I will get off my soapbox, and we are going to convert to lunch. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. And we will be around if you have any other questions. So let us reset the room, and we'll do lunch. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the throne.
Oh, you're always.
So each state may be different. In the state of Ohio, the law states that wine is not required. However, it is our family policy if we're gonna have an open casket viewing for the public that we require involvement.